So this is going to be a collective reading for June 2023, Carlos Castaneda's Journey to Ixtlan. A nice vintage paperback from 1973. A little extract from the end of the book. I observed the insect for a long time, then I became aware of the silence around me. Only the wind hissed between the branches and leaves of the chaparral. I looked up, turned to my left in a quick and involuntary fashion, and caught a glimpse of a faint shadow or flicker on a rock a few feet away. At first I paid no attention to it, but then I realized that flicker had been to my left. I turned again suddenly when I was able to clearly perceive a shadow on the rock. I had the weird sensation that the shadow instantly slid down to the ground and the soil absorbed it as a blotter dries an ink blotch. A chill ran down my back. The thought crossed my mind that death was watching me and the beetle. I looked for the insect again, but I could not find it. I thought that it must have arrived at its destination and then had dropped its load into a hole in the ground. I put my face against a smooth rock. The beetle emerged from a deep hole and stopped a few inches away from my face. It seemed to look at me, and for a moment I felt that I became aware of my presence. Perhaps as I was aware of the presence of my death, I experienced a shiver. The beetle and I were not that different after all. Death, like a shadow, was stalking both of us from behind the boulder. I had an extraordinary moment of elation. The beetle and I were on a par. Neither of us was better than the other. Our death made us equal. My elation and joy were so overwhelming that I began to weep. Don Juan was right. He had always been right. I was living in a most mysterious world, unlike everyone else. I was the most mysterious being, yet I was no more important than a beetle. I wiped my eyes, and as I rubbed them with the back of my hand, I saw a man, or something which had the shape of a man. It was to my right, about 50 yards. I sat up straight and strained to see. The sun was almost on the horizon, and its yellowish glow prevented me from getting a clear view. I heard a peculiar roar at that moment. It was like the sound of a distant jet plane. As I focused my attention on it, the roar increased to a prolonged, sharp, metallic whizzing, and then it softened until it was a mesmerizing, melodious sound. The melody was like the vibration of an electrical current. The image that came to my mind was that two electrified spheres were coming together, or two square blocks of electrified metal were rubbing against each other, and then coming to rest with a thump when they were perfectly levelled with each other. I again strained to see if I could distinguish the person that seemed to be hiding from me, but I could only detect a dark shape against the bushes. I shielded my eyes by placing my hands above them. The brilliancy of the sunlight changed at that moment, and then I realized that what I was seeing was only an optical illusion, a play of shadows and foliage. I moved my eyes away, and I saw a coyote calmly trotting across the field. The coyote was around the spot where I thought I had seen the man. It moved about 50 yards in a southerly direction, and then it stopped, turned, and began walking towards me. I yelled a couple of times to scare it away, but it kept on coming. I had a moment of apprehension. I thought that it might be rabid, and I even considered gathering some rocks to defend myself in case of an attack. When the animal was 10 to 15 feet away, I noticed that it was not agitated in any way. On the contrary, it seemed calm and unafraid. It slowed down its gait, coming to a halt barely 4 or 5 feet from me. We looked at each other, and then the coyote came even closer. Its brown eyes were friendly and clear. I sat down on the rocks, and the coyote stood almost touching me. I was dumbfounded. I had never seen a wild coyote that close, and the only thing that occurred to me at that moment was to talk to it. I began as one would talk to a friendly dog, and then I thought that the coyote talked back to me. I had the absolute certainty that I had said something. I felt confused, but I did not have time to ponder upon my feelings, because the coyote talked again. It was not that the animal was voicing words the way I am accustomed to hearing words, but being voiced by human beings. It was rather a feeling that it was talking, but it was not like a feeling that one has when a pet seems to communicate with its master either. The coyote actually said something. It relayed a thought, and that communication came out in something quite similar to a sentence. I said, "How are you, little coyote?" I thought I had heard the animal respond, "I'm all right, and you?" Then the coyote repeated the sentence, and I jumped to my feet. The animal did not make a single movement. It was not even startled by my sudden jump. Its eyes were still friendly and clear. It lay down on its stomach and tilted its head and asked, "Why are you afraid?" I sat down facing it, and I carried on the weirdest conversation I had ever had. Finally it asked me what I was doing there, and I said I had come there to stop the world. The coyote said, "Que bueno," and then I realized it was a bilingual coyote. The nouns and verbs of its sentences were in English, but the conjunctions and exclamations were in Spanish. The thought crossed my mind that I was in the presence of a Chicano coyote. I began to laugh at the absurdity of it all, and I laughed so hard that I became almost hysterical. Then the full weight of the impossibility of what was happening struck me, and my mind wobbled. The coyote stood up, and our eyes met. I stared fixedly into them. I felt they were pulling me, and suddenly the animal became iridescent. It began to glow. It was as if my mind were replaying the memory of another event that had taken place 10 years before, when under the influence of peyote I witnessed the metamorphosis of an ordinary dog into an unforgettable iridescent being. It was as though the coyote had triggered the recollection, and the memory of that previous event was summoned and became superimposed on the coyote's shape. The coyote was a fluid, liquid, luminous being. Its luminosity was dazzling. I wanted to cover my eyes with my hands to protect them, but I could not move. The luminous being touched me in some undefined part of myself, and my body experienced such an exquisite, indescribable warmth and well-being that it was as if the touch had made me explode. I became transfixed. I could not feel my feet or my legs or any part of my body, yet something was sustaining me erect. I have no idea how long I stayed in that position. In the meantime, the luminous coyote and the hilltop where I stood melted away. I had no thoughts or feelings. Everything had been turned off. I was floating freely. Suddenly I felt that my body had been struck, and that I became enveloped by something that kindled me. I became aware then that the sun was shining on me. I could vaguely distinguish a distant range of mountains towards the west. The sun was almost over the horizon. I was looking directly into it, and then I saw the lines of the world. I actually perceived the most extraordinary profusion of fluorescent white lights which crisscrossed everything around me. For a moment I thought I was perhaps experiencing sunlight as it was being reflected by my eyelashes. I blinked and looked again. The lines were constant and were superimposed on or were coming through everything in the surroundings. I turned around and examined an extraordinarily new world. The lines were visible and steady even if I looked away from the sun. I stayed on the hilltop in a state of ecstasy for what appeared to be an endless time. Yet the whole event may have lasted only a few minutes, perhaps only as long as the sun shone before it reached the horizon, but to me it seemed an endless time. I felt something warm and soothing oozing out of the world and out of my body. I knew I had discovered a secret. It was so simple. I experienced an unknown flood of feelings. Never in my life had I such a divine euphoria, such peace, such an encompassing grasp, and yet I could not put the discovered secret into words or even into thoughts, but my body knew it. Then I fell asleep or I fainted. When I again became aware of myself, I was lying on the rocks. I stood up. The world was as I had always seen it. It was getting dark and I automatically started on my way back to my car. Don Juan was alone in the house when I arrived the next morning. I asked him about Don Girano, and he said that he was somewhere in the vicinity running an errand. I immediately began to narrate to him the extraordinary experiences I had had. He listened with obvious interest. "You have simply stopped the world," he commented after I had finished my account. We remained silent, and then Don Juan said that I had to thank Don Girano for helping me. He seemed to be unusually pleased with me. He patted my back repeatedly and chuckled. "But it is inconceivable that a coyote could talk," I said. "It wasn't talk," Don Juan replied. "What was it then?" "Your body understood for the first time, but you failed to recognize that it was not a coyote to begin with, and that it certainly was not talking the way you and I talk." "But the coyote really talked," Don Juan. "Now look who is talking like an idiot. After all these years of learning, you should know better. Yesterday you stopped the world, and you might even have seen. A magical being told you something, and your body was capable of understanding it because the world had collapsed. The world was like it is today, Don Juan." "No, it wasn't. Today the coyotes do not tell you anything, and you cannot see the lines of the world. Yesterday you did all that simply because something had stopped in you." "What was the thing that stopped in me?" "What stopped inside you yesterday was what people have been telling you the world is like. You see, people tell us from the time we were born that the world is such, and so on, and so and so. And naturally we have no choice but to see the world that way. People have been telling us it is." We looked at each other. "Yesterday the world became as sorcerers tell you it is," he went on. "In that world coyotes talk, and so do deer, as I once told you, and so do rattlesnakes and trees and all other living beings. But what I want you to learn is seeing. Perhaps you know now that seeing happens only when one sneaks between the worlds, the world of ordinary people and the world of sorcerers. You are now smack in the middle point between the two. Yesterday you believed the coyote talked to you. Any sorcerer who doesn't see would believe the same. But one who sees knows that to believe that it is to be pinned down in the realm of sorcerers. By the same token, not to believe that coyotes talk is to be pinned down in the realm of ordinary men." "Do you mean, Don Juan, that neither the world of ordinary men nor the world of sorcerers is real?" "They are real worlds. They could act upon you. For example, you could have asked that coyote about anything you wanted to know, and it would have been compelled to give you an answer. The only sad part is that coyotes are not reliable. They are tricksters. It is your fate not to have a dependable animal companion." Don Juan explained that the coyote was going to be my companion for life, and in that world of sorcerers, to have a coyote friend was not a desirable state of affairs. He said that it would have been ideal for me to have talked to a rattlesnake, since they were stupendous companions. "If I were you," he added, "I would never trust a coyote, but you are different, and you may even become a coyote sorcerer." What is a coyote sorcerer? One who draws a lot of things from his coyote brothers. I wanted to keep on asking questions, but he made a gesture to stop me. You have seen the lines of the world, he said. You have seen a luminous being. You are now almost ready to meet the ally. Of course, you know that the man you saw in the bushes was the ally. You heard its roar like the sound of a jet plane. He'll be waiting for you at the edge of a plane I will take you to myself. We were quiet for a long time. Don Juan had his hands clasped over his stomach. His thumbs moved almost imperceptibly. Gennaro will have to go with us to that valley, he said all of a sudden. He is the one who has helped you to stop the world.